If you coach at LSU, I think a certain amount of talent just falls in your lap. But Brian Kelly doing much better than that as a coaching transition and getting ready for this February signing deadline. A little more activity for LSU than a lot of teams out there that had closed out the deal in December. We got Carter on the line from Power Hour LSU right here on YouTube. Carter, what's going on, man?
Mark, let's go. It's a great day. Good to be back with you again. And you just breathe in and you breathe out the week of recruiting, and everything's changed now with the transfer portal. So I think, Mark, you felt this as well. With this being the first full cycle where recruits understood the transfer portal and schools understood it as well, this signing day felt a lot different than normal ones.
Oh, yeah. You got to include the transfer portal. You got to include that in your evaluation, looking at these teams. You can't just be, bam, let's go right to the recruiting rankings. There we are. We got portal rankings now. So
right.
That tells you that right there. So Ole Miss making a big deal out of the transfer portal. And, hey, it's their right. So much has been made of that. Harold Perkins. That was a big get on National Signing Day. Number one linebacker in the country who had committed to Texas A&M. Decommits just a couple days prior. Then he completes the flip.
He does. And this is what's really fascinating, okay? Now, I am wearing an LSU shirt. I do have Joe Burrow bobbleheads behind me, right? But on my channel, I try and be as objective as I can. And this was before Harold Perkins actually signed with LSU. He was my number one player in 2022, period. No matter where he went. I think he's really special. I think he's a transcendent type of linebacker. Obviously, LSU is going to have to figure out the best way to use him because he was, such a great player off the edge, but he can also play traditional linebacker. He's athletic enough to play safety. His running back tape is legit jaw-dropping as well. And that was by far the biggest splash on signing day. I think out of anyone as far as SEC schools are concerned, right? Especially at a position of need with a defense that is going to be rebuilt with a defensive coordinator who hasn't called defenses and hasn't been in the college game since 2018, and Matt House. So you give Matt House a lot of credit. He was able to hop on a Zoom call with Harold Perkins the day before when Matt House himself was getting ready to go up against the Cincinnati Bengals. But obviously you give Brian Kelly and really Harold Perkins' family the absolute most credit because there was a lot, and I mean a heavy push from some people in Harold's circle who was he was initially from New Orleans. There was a lot of people in that circle that really helped get that across the finish line. So really good stuff.
Power Hour LSU right here on YouTube. Check out Carter's work. It's amazing. So check out his insight, information, enthusiasm. It's all there for you LSU fans, SEC fans, college football fans. Check it out. All right. Were there any misses in this class that really hurt? Any guys that got away? Positions of need?
Yeah, so the first thing you always look at is the state of Louisiana, right? And there were a lot, but this was a transition year. Ed Orgeron missed out on a lot in 2017 as well. So this isn't anything new. Transition years, new coaching staffs. This happens quite often, right? So Aaron Anderson, Chaz Preston, and Kendrick Law are like the three big receivers, all three top 150 players in the nation, all from the state of Louisiana, all from different parts of the state of Louisiana. They all go to Alabama. And then the cherry on top was Danny Lewis, the tight end who was in the viral Brian Kelly video, also ended up going to Alabama at a position where there was a lot of immediate playing time available because Brian Kelly and Mike Denbrock are known for tight end development. And that is by far LSU's thinnest room on offense, especially if you view Jack Besh as a wide receiver instead of a tight end. So those were the big misses on offense. And then on defense, it was Jacoby Matthews from, once again, the state of Louisiana, a top 40 player nationally. Going to Texas A&M, and this is where it gets really fascinating, Mark, is these kids, they don't lose their relationships, right? All kids keep relationships with kids on other teams and the coaching staff. So this goes for anyone. And Mark, you got fans from all across the country that watch this. Just because a kid signs with the school, it's not as if they completely forgot who the coaches were at the other school. And if they're just the slightest bit disappointed, they can enter the transfer portal. And if you're talented enough, guess what? Those schools that were once recruiting you would definitely take you in, especially, Mark, if the 7 extra transfer rule is something that is continued over the next couple of seasons.
That's a great point right there. These kids communicate so much more via text, DM, everything available to them than what we may traditionally think. You know, it's not the everybody else is the enemy mentality of 1975.
Right.
Well, once you sign with the team, no question about that. And so this, to me, shouldn't matter, doesn't matter, but maybe it does matter. The player in the video is the tight end that went to Alabama that signed late.
Right.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it was him. It was him. And he was a late riser too. And just to, add fuel to that fire, this is honestly the craziest thing, right? He was committed to Cincinnati to play for Mike Denbrock, who is now the offensive coordinator at LSU, who was also the tight ends coach at Cincinnati. So he was the main recruiter. Mike Denbrock has a good, I guess you could say, respect on the recruiting trail. I was told by Notre Dame insiders that Denbrock is a tireless recruiter. You don't always get that from your coordinators. And everything was pointing to Danny Lewis saying, look, I get to stay at home. LSU's best player is from the same high school as Danny Lewis, Keishawn Butte. They went to Westgate together. They were teammates, and he still went to Alabama. So you do begin to start questioning, and this goes for any kid. We don't know for sure, right? Because I don't want Jimbo Fisher jumping in your comment section. I want Jimbo Fisher coming after me. We don't know for sure if player X got so much money or whatnot, but there are extra factors that we have to consider now, right? There's another kid, Trevante Citizen, who was a really good running back in the state of Louisiana, and it was either going to be LSU or Florida, and then at the last second, Mario Cristobal, one of the best recruiters in the country, the kid ends up going to Miami. So you just don't know. I think now, Mark, what you're going to see is 2 things in college football. The first is you're going to see more kids wait until February. It doesn't make any sense to not do that, especially if you're an elite kid and you know that a school is going to keep a slot for you. That just allows you to, quote unquote, hold out a little bit longer, see what else is out there. Because we saw with all these kids, there was a lot of last second flipping and negotiations that were allegedly happening with quite a few LSU prospects and just prospects around the country. And the second thing you will see, and I really, really do believe this, is you're going to see more kids do things out of the ordinary. You're going to see more Trevante Citizen. You're going to see more unpredictability simply because it's the wild, wild west right now. So much is changing. And as a player, you have more leverage too, because if you sign early, you don't know if coaches are going to get fired. You don't know what's going to happen. Why not wait until that February period to see how all the cards shake out?
Which is an interesting note, because it was always my thought that this first signing day that was just added about 3 to 4 years ago in mid-December was for the player benefit, meaning that most student athletes, many had provided that feedback that, hey, in the old world, before money was a factor, at least above the table, in the old world, hey, a ton of us want an opportunity to just sign. We know where we're going. We know where we want to go, and let us get there so we don't have coaches bothering us for another 2 months. We can be signed and sealed, and then, hey, still give the other opportunity for this. But you're right. It could be hey, why don't I just hang on to this for a little bit longer? Good point. Good point. Good point. You bring up Louisiana talent, and Miami, Mario seem to be getting attempting their digs in there, and Miami has in the past, and maybe he did a little more successfully because of coaching transition there. Give everybody an idea, because man, I look at the Houston metro area is ridiculously flooded, the Atlanta metro area, the DMV up in Washington D.C. We know about Texas, Florida, California as states. Louisiana doesn't have the population, but the per capita ratio of NFL players is insane.
Yeah, so this is what we do on our channel, right? We go really, really deep on LSU football. It's like just craziness. So if you are a diehard LSU football fan, and you've watched our channel before, you know what I'm about to say as far as the state of Louisiana is concerned. Now, it's going to come off as biased, okay? But there is something mythical about a Louisiana 3-star, right? So, yes, we have 3-stars that pop up all around the country, okay? You have Patrick Mahomes, J.J. Watt, whoever you want to mention, right? But Louisiana 3-stars really churn out a lot of talent. And what's really interesting about it is there are two different Louisianas, right? You have South Louisiana, and then you have North Louisiana. And they seem like two different places, right? You always hear this quote, if you past Alexandria, which is near the center of the state, you're going into a new state. And look, North Louisiana has produced so many great players, some of the best players. Andrew Whitworth, who's about to play in the Super Bowl, Jacob Hester, Devin White, Morris Claiborne was a 3-star out of North Louisiana who won the freaking Thorpe. It's crazy, right? There's all these amazing players, and LSU just has a stranglehold on the state, or at least we think they have. You know, this was the first year where in quite some time you saw so many players leave the state. And once again, it was just that transition year. So there is, you know, Mark, for people that don't follow LSU, there is always this argument amongst LSU fans, particularly ones that live in Louisiana. Why do we have such a national blueprint when so many 3-stars are so freaking good, and they go to a different school and they ball the freak out? Now, this is where it gets spicy, okay? What could happen, and what we did see in this first year of the transfer portal, were a lot of the Louisiana 3-stars that were shunned and weren't really pursued that heavily by LSU. They went somewhere else and came back, right? So Jarek Bernard-Converse, who is going to more than likely be one of LSU's starting corners, he's a North Louisiana guy. He's a 3-star. He's from Evangel, and he balls out at Oklahoma State, and he still decided to come back and play for the home state school. Greg Brooks and Joe Fuchsia, who went to Arkansas, and they were lower-ranked recruits. Joe was actually offered by LSU, but still, the point is that they still came back. So we could be in a spot now, Mark, where the transfer portal really does help out LSU, because there is so much talent that leaves the state, and they turn out to be really, really good football players elsewhere.
Carter, give me a position between now and when you tee it up against whoever the week 1 game is. I know Florida State's a big one, and I think that's the week 1, right? That's not their week 1. They've got a week 0 against Duquesne. Okay, that's the opener. Florida State in New Orleans. Before that game gets underway, what position, if you could only pick one, needs to get some serious help?
Yeah, so you look at tight end, you look at center offensively. Those are two big positions of need. Once again, Brian Kelly does give the quote that a lot of coaches give: we're going to form our team to our talent. Well, LSU's weakest position on offense is tight end, and their strongest position on offense is wide receiver. And those two positions often coincide with how many players are going to be on the field at one time. So that's going to be very key as far as tight end. And then center is going to be absolutely huge. They had the same center for 2 years, the transfer from Harvard. And Liam Shanahan, he wasn't ideal He wasn't really a center before he got there, and LSU never really had a backup center. So Brad Davis is going to have to figure out their offensive line coach, who their center is going to be. Now, the quarterback position is always the most important. We'll see what Miles Brennan can do next year. But then defensively, it's pretty simple. It's that secondary, right? You hear LSU. LSU is DBU. But going into next year, you're relying on all these transfers. You'll lose a lot of your best players in the secondary. Who plays where is also going to be interesting when it comes to who's the nickel, who's the safety, who's the corner. I think you're going to see some shuffling there during the spring, and we'll see what happens come fall.
We talked to some Auburn media the other day. They seem to be suppressing the the controversy and just the outside optics of what it looks like right now with Brian Harsin. But my goodness, they got off to a 6-2 start. They lost 5 consecutive games. You can kind of look into those games and see where it's a little more understandable than they just fell off a cliff. But now they're losing coaches and players.
Right.
And when it's a few in this day and age, everybody's losing players. But, man, they're not getting any back. What's going on there, and how could this impact LSU?
I'll get up on LSU big time. There was a lot of kids that ended up going to Auburn at the last second at defensive back who ended up going to Auburn over LSU. Jadarian Rom was committed to LSU for a long time, and Osbury was a kid whose dad is a higher up at LSU who decided to go to Auburn. So I do think there's going to be a lot of schools that are going to be interested to see if more Auburn players enter the portal. Now, what's really interesting as far as Brian Harsin is concerned is, we could talk what we want about the off the field stuff, but there was one radical difference that happened to him, and it happens to a lot of coaches, right? They become cowards. They really do. And all I care about is if you are brave enough between the headset, can you make the difficult decisions to win your team's football games? And when he was on the road in Death Valley, he had just fired the really popular wide receiver coach at Auburn, but he went into Death Valley and won that game. And it did help out that Bo Nix played phenomenally. But the reason why they won that game, Mark, was because they were really what happened against Alabama was the opposite, right? They kind of backed into that win. They had an opportunity to go for 2 and the win, and they didn't do it. And that's the thing. Brian Harsin, the way we view him now would be so different if he actually had won that daggum Iron Bowl, right? But now you decrease the amount of room you have for error when all this stuff is swirling around you, right? If you win, and people will find ways to keep you around. But the thing is, you didn't win that Iron Bowl. The bowl game was a mess, and now you lose both your coordinators, and your players haven't bought in. It's a disaster. And Mark, the bottom line, and I know Auburn fans that watch your channel are going to be really mad that an LSU fan is saying that Auburn is now a basketball school. End of story.
Those are fighting words. Those are serious words for an SEC school outside of Kentucky, of course.
Right. There's nothing wrong with it. Nothing wrong with it. Lean into it, man. You got Jabari Smith. His dad was one of my favorite LSU basketball players of all time. I mean, you got Bruce Pearl, got Alan Green, the athletic director, fully behind him. You're a basketball school, and you got the world-class gymnast, Suni Lee, there. Just admit it. And here's the thing, Mark, with the transfer portal, you can always flip a roster really quickly. You can always, pull a Mel Tucker and get a lot of really good players in and flip it in 1 year. But Auburn, the uphill climb is just too uphill for me, right? A&M is out recruiting you. Alabama's out recruiting you. LSU's out recruiting you. You still have to play Georgia every year as your cross-division rival. I just don't see any light at the end of the tunnel here with Auburn, now with by far the worst coach in the West.
And that's a tough pill to swallow for Auburn fans because they're already situated in a way because of the division, because Nick Saban's a monster and he's in the same state and nobody else has to deal with that in terms of a daily 24/7, 365 conversation, because of the Georgia the constant, the rivalry game cross division, that it might be the most difficult job in college football. I've made that assessment a number of times based on expectation. Of course, Kansas is the toughest, or pick your team out there in the wilderness in terms of trying to just notch wins. But if you're talking about expectations versus wins, give me Auburn as the answer to that question.
Yeah, easily, and we'll see. We'll see. I'll say this. Well, let's just say Brian Harsin is let go. Once again, I think one move that would make a lot of sense is going back to Derek Mason and just giving him the job, right? If that is what's going to happen. The second thing I would do is, if Brian Harsin is let go, it's just make Cadillac Williams your interim and then see what happens this year. It might work. And then you just go from there. But, that's the thing. It's recruiting is just so different now. And I can't wait to see how this all plays out, right? Whatever is actually going to happen, I can't wait to see what's going to happen, because we have this, and the timing couldn't be worse, right? This is a dead period, right? There's no SEC football news coming out in the next 2 or 3 months even. It's going to be a long couple of weeks for Auburn fans.
Because you can look at it this way. If this just is a normal job that doesn't have the type of public perception and all of that, this would be a very mean and harsh thing to do. A guy does his job for 1 year. It's a pretty marginal job, but hey, let's continue to monitor him and see how he does. And even as a football coach, how many people expected, shoot, I picked Auburn to go 6-6 this year. They did pretty much what I expected. And then I was expecting, of course, go on from there. But the expectations are they want a coach that's going to go 9-3, 10-2 most of the time and compete for SEC championships a reasonable amount of time. If you look at it, what is the probability that Brian Harsin is that guy based on what we've seen after 1 year and this off season? The probability is extremely low that he's that guy. So if you're making business sense, time is money. Time is like a killer in the SEC. If you get buried as a program, it takes a long time to get out of it, even in this day and age, because the competition's so good in the conference and in the division, not because you can't turn it around in other places, but there versus who you have to play. Yeah.
Yeah. And here's the thing. Is it impossible for Auburn to turn this thing around? No, it's not impossible. It's just really, really hard. And, Brian Kelly got really lucky. When you take over the LSU job, you have so many kids that still want to play for LSU, that want to keep their commitments, that ended up signing anyway to LSU, right? And that's the big advantage LSU has just over, everyone in the West. You have this fertile state where kids really want to play at LSU no matter who the coach is. So, you give BK a lot of credit for turning that around. And one thing once again, I'm going to get hated for saying this as well. I do like what Florida's doing as well. That's going to be a tough turnaround for Napier, but I like the staff. I like Tony. I like a lot of what he's done there. And signing day didn't go their way. They missed out on Harold Perkins. They missed out on Matthews. They missed out on Citizen. And they were really trying to get into the state of Louisiana. And it's going to be way harder, even though there is so much Louisiana influence on that staff. And they did get Corey Raymond, who is a legend as a recruiter in Louisiana and Florida. So still, even though Florida missed out, and even though Florida, if you polled most SEC fans or most LSU fans, they're going to say either Florida or Alabama is the school they hate the most. But still, I do think Billy Napier did a lot of good things this offseason as far as his staff, and then getting Kamari Wilson, getting Caleb Douglas here at the end. It wasn't the worst start for a coach at a program where, there's a lot of pressure for you to win.
We know why Alabama, Carter. Why Florida? Why are they on that list of hatred?
There's a lot. Obviously, the Tebow years are always just visceral. But it happened, a few years ago with how the hurricane was dealt with in Florida, and the rescheduling of games and the
Yep.
mudslinging that came along with it. And, you've just really in the past decade, you've had these wild games. So, the late 90s, this was an iconic game when Kevin Falk and LSU beat Florida. That was a pretty big year for that led into the Saban era because Kevin Falk made it cool to play for LSU again, and that win signified a lot for LSU fans. But really, it is more so the recent years, and obviously the shoe throw is just a gigantic moment in Florida Gators history because the program is never the same after that.
Okay, for LSU fans, that I get. I thought you said SEC fans, like across the board, like the entire conference. Okay,
Okay.
LSU fans, I get that rivalry. You play them every year. Yeah, you had to mess with games because of the hurricane and scheduling, and somebody got a back-to-back, right? Somebody got an unfair advantage of having the home game 2 consecutive years. Yeah, people get, of course, Urban and the combination of Urban and Tebow for 3 or 4 years. Yeah, I get it. All right. Power Hour LSU right here on YouTube. Got to get there. Do it right now. You see Carter's Twitter handle as well. Carter, we appreciate you stopping by, man. It's always a great conversation.
Mark, until we meet again, good to talk to you, my brother.